All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some pretty heady philosophical territory
Yeah.
with Tibetan Buddhism,
Okay.
specifically the concept of emptiness.
Sounds good.
You've given us the book Mirror of Wisdom,
Right.
which is Geshe Sultan Gyaltsen's commentary on emptiness from the Heart Sutra,
Okay.
and Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, published back in 2000 for the Dalai Lama's visit to LA.
Uh-huh.
So buckle up, everyone, because we are about to unpack some seriously mind-bending ideas.
Yeah, and hopefully dismantle a few misconceptions about emptiness along the way.
Oh, totally.
It's fascinating how often emptiness gets misunderstood,
Oh, for sure.
as like nihilism or a belief that nothing exists.
Yeah, right. Like the floor is going to disappear and we're all just floating in a void.
Exactly.
But it isn't about negating reality at all, is it?
No, not at all.
It's more about challenging our assumptions about how things actually exist.
Yeah, think about that classic Buddhist story about the lion mistaking its reflection for a real lion.
Oh.
Jumps in the lake ready to fight all because of a misconception.
So is our suffering kind of like that lion
Exactly.
battling illusions?
Exactly. Tibetan Buddhism calls this innate ignorance, this clinging to a solid self.
Okay.
And a solid reality, we grasp at things you see
Mm-hmm.
as if they're permanent and unchanging, when in fact, everything is in flux.
Okay, so less lake diving lion, more like understanding the flow of the river.
Yeah.
But how does the Heart Sutra fit into all of this?
Whoa.
It's famous for being so short but incredibly dense.
It is. And that famous line, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, is a perfect example of how the sutra uses paradox to point us towards a truth beyond our usual way of thinking.
Okay, because if everything's empty, how can anything have form?
Well,
My brain's already starting to twist into a pretzel.
that's the point, you see.
Ah.
The sutra isn't trying to give us a new, more accurate description of reality.
Okay.
Instead, it's trying to break down the very way that we categorize and conceptualize the world. Look at the 8 characteristics of emptiness that it describes.
Okay.
It says that emptiness has no defining characteristics. It's unproduced. It doesn't cease.
So if emptiness has no defining characteristics, how can it be anything?
Well, that's the paradox.
Okay.
It pushes us beyond the limitations of our conceptual mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about emptiness being something. It's about recognizing that everything that we perceive is empty of inherent independent existence.
So instead of trying to define what emptiness is, we should be looking at what it reveals about everything else.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's like washing dirt from clothes.
Okay.
You remove the dirt, but the cloth itself remains.
Right.
Emptiness doesn't negate the conventional reality that we experience.
Uh-huh.
It just reveals a deeper truth beneath it.
Okay.
A truth that thankfully doesn't require us to renounce all our possessions and live as naked ascetics.
Phew, that's a relief.
Right.
But how do we even begin to grasp this deeper truth?
Yeah.
It's not like emptiness is something you can just Google and instantly understand.
You're right. It's a journey.
Okay.
Tibetan Buddhism outlines specific stages on the path to understanding emptiness.
Uh-huh.
The first steps involve developing a conceptual understanding through study and meditation.
Okay.
This is where we start to train our minds to see beyond the surface level of appearances.
So like building those mental muscles
Exactly.
to see through the illusion.
Yes.
But I'm guessing it isn't a quick process.
Not at all. Even Lama Tsongkhapa, a renowned Tibetan Buddhist scholar and meditator, had a powerful experience that illustrates this point.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this.
You have.
Wasn't Lama Tsongkhapa doing some pretty intense practices?
He was 350,000 prostrations,
Oh, wow.
wearing the skin off his forearm from countless mandala offerings, all part of his purification practices.
Okay.
But even with all that Manjushri told him, he still hadn't fully grasped emptiness
Really?
and needed to do even more purification practices.
Wow, so even the experts struggle with this.
Well, the point is
Makes my little meditation practice seem like a walk in the park.
that understanding emptiness is a lifelong process,
Okay.
not a one-time achievement.
Uh-huh.
It's about continually refining our understanding and deepening our experience.
So it's less about reaching a destination
Exactly.
and more about the ongoing journey of uncovering those layers.
Precisely.
Deeper and deeper layers of reality.
Yes. And that journey can be incredibly challenging.
Oh, I bet.
One of the biggest hurdles is recognizing and overcoming the obstacles that arise during meditation.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk obstacle.
Okay.
What are some of the common culprits that trip us up on this path?
Well, 2 of the biggest are laxity and excitement.
Okay.
Laxity is that mental dullness,
Right.
like when your mind starts to drift or you get sleepy during meditation.
Yeah.
And excitement is the opposite.
Okay.
It's when your thoughts are racing and pulling your attention away from the object of your focus.
Ugh, I know those all too well.
They're common to everyone.
It's like they team up to sabotage any attempt at inner peace.
The text uses a powerful metaphor to describe how we need to equip ourselves to deal with these obstacles.
Okay.
It compares the mind to a horse-sharp wisdom, to the weapon pure discipline to a healthy body,
Okay.
all necessary for a warrior riding into battle.
I'm liking this warrior metaphor.
Good.
Makes me feel a little more equipped to face those mental battles.
Right.
But how do we actually apply it to our meditation practice?
Think of it this way. A calm, well-trained mind,
Hmm.
the horse,
Okay.
allows us to wield the weapon of wisdom effectively,
Uh-huh.
analyzing emptiness without getting distracted.
Right.
And ethical conduct, pure discipline, the healthy body keeps us strong and resilient on the path.
So we're not just passively observing our thoughts, but we're actively training our minds to
Exactly.
be more focused, more insightful, and more resilient.
Exactly. It's about cultivating all three aspects:
Okay.
mental stability, wisdom, and ethical conduct,
Got it.
to support our journey towards understanding emptiness.
So we're not just aiming for a quiet mind.
Right.
We're aiming for a skillful mind, one that can cut through delusion and grasp the true nature of reality.
Well said. And that brings us to another crucial concept that the source material highlights:
Okay.
the 12 links of dependent origination.
Right. The ignorance to aging and death cycle.
Yeah.
This always sounds kind of doom and gloom to me.
Well,
I'm guessing there's a more nuanced perspective here.
definitely. It's not meant to be fatalistic, but rather a tool for understanding how we create our own suffering.
Okay.
The 12 links describe a chain reaction starting with ignorance
Right.
and leading through a series of causes and effects all the way to aging and death.
So it's like a map of how suffering operates,
Precisely.
showing us all the steps.
Exactly. And by understanding these links, we can start to see how to break free from the cycle.
Okay.
The key is to recognize that the entire chain reaction stems from that root cause of ignorance,
Okay.
which is our misconception of how things exist.
So if we can uproot ignorance, we can essentially stop the entire chain reaction of suffering in its track.
Exactly. And this is where the wisdom realizing emptiness comes in.
Right.
By seeing through the illusion of inherent existence,
Okay.
we dismantle the very foundation of ignorance.
So we're not just meditating on emptiness in the abstract.
No.
We're connecting it to the actual causes of our suffering and using it as a tool for liberation.
It's about moving beyond intellectual understanding
Okay.
and experiencing emptiness directly,
Right.
which is where meditation practices come in.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our duck dive.
Exactly.
Perfect, because I'm definitely ready to move beyond theory and get into the practical techniques. I'm ready to train my inner warrior
Excellent.
and tackle those obstacles head on.
That's the spirit.
All right, so last time we were talking about how meditation is crucial for actually experiencing emptiness,
Right.
not just intellectually grasping it.
Exactly.
You mentioned specific techniques. Can you give us a little taste of what those look like?
Well, there are many, but one powerful practice involves contemplating the 5 aggregates:
Okay.
form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness.
Right.
These are like the basic building blocks of our experience. Right?
Okay. A quick refresher on what those actually are would be helpful.
Sure.
It's been a while since Buddhism 101.
Form is our physical body feeling, is any sensation, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral perception, is how we recognize and label things. Mental formations are our thoughts, emotions, and impulses, and consciousness is that basic awareness itself.
So it's like we're breaking down our experience into
right.
its most fundamental components.
Yeah.
Kind of like a scientist analyzing the elements of, well, everything.
Exactly. But instead of a microscope, we're using the power of our own minds to investigate.
Okay.
The practice involves analyzing each aggregate and asking, does this really exist independently? Or is it a fleeting interdependent process?
So we're applying that lens of emptiness to even the most basic aspects of ourselves.
Right. We start to see how each aggregate depends on countless causes and conditions.
Okay.
Taken from our physical body.
Right.
It can't exist without the food. We eat the air, we breathe the parents who gave us our genes.
And our feelings depend on external stimuli.
Yes.
Our perceptions are shaped by our past experiences. Our thoughts are influenced by, well, practically everything.
Exactly.
It's like this whole web of interconnectedness starts to reveal itself.
Exactly. And at the center of this web, we often place this idea of a solid, independent self.
Right.
But through this practice, we start to see that the self is also empty of inherent existence.
Okay.
It's more like a process, a flow of these five aggregates,
Right.
rather than a fixed entity.
That is kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it.
This,
No wonder the text talks about this practice as chipping away at our ingrained belief in a solid self.
yes.
No more me as this unchanging island, more like a constantly shifting river.
It's a radical shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And for some, it can be quite unsettling.
Oh.
We're so used to clinging to that idea of a solid self, even though, as we've been exploring, that clinging is the root of so much suffering.
It's like we're being asked to step off a cliff and trust that we'll fly.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that's where the real freedom lies, letting go of that tight grip on me and mine.
Precisely. And the more we meditate on emptiness, the more this understanding permeates our everyday lives.
Okay.
It changes how we relate to everything, our experiences, ourselves, and the world around us.
Yeah.
But the path to this freedom isn't always easy, and the source material doesn't shy away from that.
Speaking of challenging practices, the text mentions some pretty intense imagery, like visualizing death and decomposition.
Right.
Is that really necessary on this path?
Well, it's certainly not for everyone,
Okay.
but the purpose isn't to be morbid or depressing.
Okay.
It's about confronting the impermanence of our physical form head-on, visualizing the body decaying, being eaten by worms returning to dust.
Right.
It can be a powerful antidote to our usual delusion of permanence.
Okay. I can see how that would shake things up a bit.
It can.
Maybe jolt us out of complacency.
Yeah.
But if someone's not quite ready for the full death and decay experience, are there other techniques that work with impermanence, but are maybe a bit gentler?
Absolutely. Another practice involves analyzing those 12 links of dependent origination we talked about earlier.
Right.
This time, instead of just understanding the cycle conceptually, we meditate on it, tracing those links back to the root cause of ignorance.
So we're connecting emptiness not just to ourselves,
Right.
but to the entire chain of events that create our reality.
Right. Remember how each link arises from the previous one? We see how ignorance gives rise to karmic formations,
Okay.
which shape our consciousness,
Right.
which creates name and form, all the way to aging and death.
Okay.
By contemplating this process, we gain deeper insight into the nature of our own minds.
So instead of just knowing the theory of dependent origination, we're actually feeling how it plays out in our lives.
Yes, and we start to see how our thoughts, emotions, and actions all contribute to this cycle.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Didn't we say that even those 12 links are themselves empty of inherent existence?
Hold on. If the cycle itself is empty, how can we be trapped by it? Isn't that a contradiction?
It's a great question, and it highlights the paradox of emptiness.
Okay.
While ultimately, everything is empty.
Right.
From our limited perspective,
Yeah.
we still experience conventional reality
Right.
with all its causes and effects. The 12 links are a skillful means of understanding how that conventional reality operates.
Okay.
It's a way of mapping the territory,
Right.
even though the map itself is also part of the territory.
So it's not about the cycle being literally real in some ultimate sense. It's about how things function from our very human perspective.
Exactly. It's a tool for gaining insight,
Right.
not a rigid dogma. And by meditating on these links, we start to unravel those deep-seated patterns of ignorance that keep us bound to the cycle of suffering.
I can see how this approach would be really empowering.
It is.
It's not about escaping reality.
Right.
It's about understanding it more deeply and thereby freeing ourselves from unnecessary suffering.
Exactly.
But does this understanding actually translate into action?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember how we talked about emptiness not being nihilistic?
Right.
It doesn't mean nothing matters.
Right.
It means things matter in a different way.
Okay. I'm with you so far. How does that connect to our actions in the world?
Think about it this way. A wave is empty of inherent existence, right? It's just a temporary formation of water constantly changing, eventually merging back into the ocean.
Okay.
But does that mean the wave isn't real?
Right.
Does it mean it has no power?
I see your point. We don't just dismiss a wave just because it's impermanent. It can still knock you over.
Exactly. In the same way, our lives are real. Our experiences are real. Our actions have real consequences, even though ultimately everything is empty of inherent existence.
Okay.
Emptiness doesn't negate meaning or purpose.
Right.
It deepens them.
Okay.
And that's where skillful means come in.
Right. We talked about that before, but I still struggle with this. If emptiness is true, what's the point of being ethical? If everything is ultimately an illusion, why bother trying to be good?
It's a common question,
Hmm.
and it gets to the heart of how wisdom and compassion work together.
Okay.
Emptiness doesn't mean anything goes. In fact, it can make us more ethical.
Okay, help me understand that leap. How does seeing through the illusion lead to better actions?
Well, when we see through the illusion of a separate self, we naturally develop more compassion for others.
Okay.
Their well-being is inextricably linked to our own.
Right.
It's not about self-sacrifice. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything.
So it's like we're dismantling those rigid boundaries we usually put between me and them.
Exactly. And when we act with compassion and understanding,
Hmm.
we create positive karma, which leads to greater happiness for everyone involved.
Okay.
It's a virtuous cycle fueled by the wisdom, realizing emptiness.
So we're not just meditating on emptiness to escape suffering, we're doing it to become more skillful and compassionate beings.
You got it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's not about checking out of reality. It's about showing up in a more beneficial way.
You got it. It's about cultivating both wisdom and skillful means.
Right.
The text uses a powerful analogy to illustrate this point.
Okay.
Remember the warrior metaphor.
Right. The calm mind, sharp wisdom, pure discipline.
Right, but how does the warrior actually fight?
Okay.
What are their weapons? It's not about fighting external enemies.
Okay.
It's about conquering those internal demons of ignorance and delusion.
Right.
The weapon is our understanding of emptiness.
Uh-huh.
And skillful means are how we wield that weapon effectively.
Right.
Compassion, generosity, patience, ethical conduct.
Yeah.
These are the tools that help us create a more positive reality for ourselves and others.
So we're not just warriors fighting for our own liberation.
No.
We're fighting for the benefit of all beings. That's a pretty inspiring way to think about it.
It is, and that's the heart of the Mahayana Buddhist path.
Yeah.
But the path is long, and there are always new challenges. Remember those obstacles to meditation we discussed earlier?
Oh, those two.
Laxity and excitement.
Like a comedy duo that's not actually funny when they're messing with your mind.
Right. It's easy to think we've conquered them,
Uh-huh.
but they can be sneaky, especially in their subtle forms.
Right.
The text warns that many experienced meditators have mistaken subtle laxity, a kind of dreamy, spaced-out state,
Okay.
for genuine insight.
Really?
They're just sitting there blissed out,
Wow.
but not actually progressing.
So we need to be really vigilant.
We do.
But how do we even recognize these subtle forms of distraction?
It
Seems like they could easily masquerade as something profound.
It takes practice and discernment.
Yeah.
The laxity bringing in more brilliance of light can help. That means visualizing a radiant clarity in your mind,
Uh-huh.
kind of like a mental sharpening.
Okay.
If that doesn't work, more drastic measures might be needed.
Pressed like what? Shaking a tambourine during meditation?
Well, hopefully not that drastic,
Okay.
but sometimes getting up, moving around, splashing water on your face, changing your posture.
Right.
Anything to shake off the dullness can help.
Makes sense. And what about excitement? How do we deal with its subtler forms, those sneaky little thoughts that tug at our attention?
Returning to the breath is always a good anchor.
Okay.
Counting inhales and exhales can help.
Uh-huh.
And remember that warrior metaphor.
Right.
A calm mind is essential for wielding the weapon of wisdom effectively.
Right.
If we're constantly distracted, we'll never hit the target.
So recognizing the obstacle is the first step.
Yeah.
Then applying the right antidote.
Right.
It's like having a mental first aid kit.
It is.
But knowing what to do and actually doing it are two different things.
That's where the real work begins. But with consistent practice, we can train our minds to be more stable, focused, and insightful.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to the really interesting part, the next level of this practice,
Okay.
identifying the object of negation.
Wait, what? Now that sounds pretty intense.
It might sound complex, but it's actually quite straightforward.
Yeah, okay.
The object of negation is simply the concept of inherent existence.
Okay.
That idea that things exist independently on their own without depending on anything else.
So we're basically trying to prove that concept wrong, like a mental debate where emptiness is the winning argument.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
We're using logic and reasoning to dismantle that deeply ingrained illusion of inherent existence.
Okay.
Remember the lion and the reflection?
Right.
Well, the object of negation is like that reflection. It appears real,
Uh-huh.
but it's just a fabrication of our minds.
I see the connection. So by negating that object of negation, the
Right.
idea that things exist inherently,
Yes.
we start to glimpse the truth of emptiness.
You got it. It's like clearing away a false belief that's been blocking our view of reality all along.
Right.
And that clearing away process is where the real power of meditation comes in.
So we're not just thinking about emptiness, We're training our minds to directly perceive it, to
Exactly.
see through the illusion of inherent existence and everything.
Exactly. We're learning to see reality as it truly is.
Wow.
Interconnected, impermanent, and ultimately empty of inherent existence.
And that leads to some pretty profound shifts in how we experience the world.
It does.
I bet it sounds like it could be both liberating and terrifying at the same time.
It can be both.
But how do we actually do that? What are the nuts and bolts of this meditation practice?
That's a great question. And it's one that deserves its own deep dive,
Okay.
which is perfect
Right.
because we'll be exploring specific meditation techniques and diving even deeper into this practice in part 3.
All right, you've definitely got me hooked. I am ready to roll up my mental sleeves and get to work with these practices.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we've been wrestling with some pretty mind-bending concepts these last 2 parts,
We have.
exploring the theory and the practice of emptiness.
Right.
But now I'm really curious to explore what it's actually like to live with this understanding.
Okay.
What happens to those who have really cracked the code,
Oh, yeah.
Those who actually see the world through this lens of emptiness.
Well, the text uses the term arya
Arya.
to describe someone who has directly experienced emptiness, not just as a concept,
Okay.
but as a lived reality.
Hold on, Arya, remind me what that means again. It sounds vaguely familiar.
It's a Sanskrit word that means noble being.
Okay.
In Buddhism, it refers to someone who has reached a significant level of spiritual realization.
Okay.
They've broken free from the cycle of suffering and are on the path to full enlightenment.
So we're not talking about your average meditator here.
No,
These are folks who are playing on a whole other level.
they've definitely gone beyond the usual limits of perception. The text says that for an Arya, when they're in deep meditation, neither does the inherent existence of phenomena appear to them, nor is there any grasping at such existence.
So for them, it's not even a struggle anymore.
Right.
That clinging to a solid self or a solid reality, it's just gone.
It's not even a factor.
Wow.
They've completely transcended that way of seeing the world. It's like someone who's learned to ride a bike.
Right.
They don't have to think about balancing anymore.
Right.
It's just natural.
That's incredible, but how is that even possible?
Well,
We're so conditioned to see things in this dualistic way, me versus the world, this versus that. How do they break free from that so completely?
It's through the power of continuous practice and cultivating insight.
Okay.
They've trained their minds through meditation to see the lack of inherent existence, not just as a theory, but as a direct experience.
So it's like they've rewired their brains almost.
Yeah.
They're perceiving reality on a whole new frequency.
That's a great way to put it. They've gone beyond conceptual thought and tapped into a deeper level of awareness.
So what's that awareness like?
Well,
Is it blissful? Terrifying?
or just empty?
The text describes it as a state of unobstructed and unafraid awareness.
Yeah.
They've gone beyond the fear and anxiety that comes from clinging to a false sense of self.
That sounds incredibly peaceful.
It is, and with that peace comes a profound sense of freedom and liberation.
Wow.
Imagine no longer being caught in those internal battles of attachment and aversion.
Yeah, what a relief that would be.
Right.
But here's what I don't get. If they've realized emptiness, does that mean they just float around in a state of detachment, not caring about anything?
Not at all.
Okay.
In fact, their compassion actually deepens because they see the interconnectedness of all things even more clearly.
So it's not about becoming indifferent.
No.
It's about being more present, more engaged with the world,
Yes.
but in a way that's free from suffering. It's exactly. They act with wisdom and skillful means, not out of obligation or personal gain, but out of a genuine desire to benefit all beings.
Oh, okay, I can see that, but it still raises a question for me. If realizing emptiness is so liberating, why don't we all just become hermits and meditate in caves until we get there?
That's where the idea of skillful means comes in again.
Okay.
The text emphasizes that withdrawing from the world isn't the only path,
Right.
or even the best path for everyone.
Right.
In fact, for many people, engaging with the world can be a powerful catalyst for spiritual growth.
So it's about finding the right balance between contemplation and action,
Exactly.
between retreating inwards and engaging with the world out there.
Exactly. And that balance will be different for each person,
Okay.
depending on their circumstances and their karmic tendencies.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to enlightenment.
Definitely not.
No single right way to get there.
The Buddha taught a wide range of skillful means,
Right.
all pointing towards that same ultimate goal of liberation from suffering.
That's a relief to hear, makes it feel less intimidating somehow.
Good.
But honestly, hearing about these areas, These realized beings?
Yes.
It can be kind of daunting.
Yeah.
Like, are we even in the same species?
Remember, they were once just like us, caught in the same cycles of suffering and confusion.
Okay.
But through continuous practice and dedication, they transform their minds.
So it's not some special superpower they were born with. It's a path that's open to any of us.
Absolutely. The Buddha himself said that everyone has the potential for enlightenment.
Wow.
It's inherent in our very nature.
That's actually a really encouraging thought. So we all have this Buddha nature, even if it's buried under layers of, well, all the stuff we've been talking about.
Confusion.
Confusion, clinging ignorance.
The path of emptiness is about peeling back those layers, revealing our true nature,
Okay.
which is inherently pure and luminous.
Okay, now I'm feeling inspired. It's
Yeah.
if they can do it, maybe we can too. Maybe not become Aryas in this lifetime, but at
Right.
least start to shift our perspective and move in that direction.
That's the spirit every step we take towards understanding emptiness. Every moment of mindfulness, every act of compassion brings us closer to that goal.
It's like we're all on this journey together, even if we're at different points along the path.
That's a beautiful way to think about it.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful for this deep dive. It's
Yeah.
been challenging for sure, but also really eye-opening.
Good.
I'm definitely going to be looking at emptiness and my own life in a whole new way.
That's what we hoped for. Remember, understanding emptiness isn't about memorizing concepts.
Right.
It's about transforming your experience. It's about waking up to the true nature of reality.
I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. Emptiness is not just a philosophical idea.
No.
It's a path, a practice, a way of being in the world. And it's available to anyone who's willing to do the work.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into emptiness. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
If this exploration has piqued your curiosity, keep going. There's a whole universe of wisdom and practice waiting to be discovered in Tibetan Buddhism.
Until next time, keep practicing, keep questioning, and keep your minds open to the boundless possibilities of emptiness.